MMM is a technical approach. I guess to kick us off, how do you define media mix modeling for our audience? I don't know, Dane, do you want to go first?
You can go
first.
Yeah.
You can go first.
I'll go first. How to define it? At its highest level, it's advanced marketing measurement. That's the very highest level that you can sort of summarize it with. It's incredibly technical, so lots of data science, and if I told you about all of the data science that goes into it, it wouldn't make any sense. But to go down to a sort of another level, I suppose MMM is really statistical modeling, and it correlates your marketing investment with the sales outputs that you get, or the conversions that you get from the market. It also has the benefit of being able to measure offline media as well as online media, and there's external factors as well, which we'll get into a bit more later on. But external factors are things like seasonality and holidays and so on.
Yeah, so I think just to add to that, I guess everyone's here because they've heard of MMM before. Media mix modeling, marketing mix modeling, econometrics, regression analysis, done in the context of measuring the impact of media, they are all the same thing. There's no difference. No matter what anyone's told you, media mix modeling is no different to marketing mix modeling. In essence, it is an incrementality measurement tool. It measures the incremental impact of your media. That is what media mix modeling is all about. And it doesn't just focus on media, as Gary said. I think the really interesting brands are ones that are using it as their central source of truth for understanding their full business. It is the recipe for your full business. Every single aspect that impacts the KPI of interest, be it sales, be it footfall, be it web visits. Media mix modeling can measure all the impact, or installs, whatever we want to measure. We can measure the impact of media, seasonality, economic factors. If you're a gaming brand, that is a sports gaming brand, we've got the Euros coming up starting this week. You can measure the impact of the Euros as an incremental impact on your installs or on your media visits. So it's incrementality, which we'll touch on as we go through this, but that's the core of media mix modeling.
But probably, actually, the other way to answer it is, instead of asking what is MMM, it's more about what people are asking us, because it's the number one question we get asked. Really what they're asking us is, what's the difference between MMM and touch attribution?
Yeah.
And the easiest way to explain that is touch attribution measures the last touch point the user was before the conversion, and MMM measures the correlation between your input and the output that you get from your marketing efforts.
Yeah, and I think that we've been living in a click-based world for the last 10, 15 years. And I think that we can all agree that we've probably been optimizing our media plans based on only a partial view of media performance. The thing I really like about media mix modeling is that it is that golden thread through time. Regardless of any changes in consumer privacy or any change in identifiers, you're going to measure with the same ruler throughout time. Whereas, obviously, attribution is changing because of the loss of signals. And that's like having a measuring tape going out and the unit of measure on that measuring tape changing every time you go to measure a space. You wouldn't try and optimize that. You wouldn't try and cut a piece of wood against that. Whereas media mix modeling, regardless of where the user level data goes, and I think we're just going to go more and more private. I don't think that IP address is a useful identifier. I think we will lose that as well eventually in some form. Media mix model will stay, and you will get the same ROI, the same measurement, the same incremental ROI, and you won't have to have these difficult conversations with your C-suite again about, we're changing how we're going to prove media and how we're going to prove our ROI. Sorry.
No, I mean, very good answers to my first question. So that sounds great. And let's say I'm a marketer that wants to invest in it. What should I expect as the output and all the benefits for me as a marketer that would want to invest into MMM?
So I think there's two sides to media mix modeling. I don't know whether we're going to take a side each, but you have the strategic and you have the tactical. I think where media mix modeling has sort of grown up and matured over the last 30, 40 years, it's actually a really, really old measurement solution that's been made modernized for the digital marketers, which Gary will obviously talk to. But top line, it answers, what is my media actually driving for my brand? How much incremental impact for my brand? how much media should I invest to grow my business? And then obviously within that, which channel is working best, and you can then go within channel, which creative is working best and which placement. On the tactical side, which is where I guess your solution comes in, you can get really, really granular with that.
Yeah, I mean, with sort of technological advances now in sort of recent years, as Damon was saying, media mix modeling has been around for decades. But now with all of the tech that we have, compute power and everything else, the models can get built in almost real time. So you can have a model that outputs or refreshes every week, which means that for performance marketers, it's now a useful tool. So you can start to optimize weekly budgets against campaign level data and so on. The thing that I like the most about, and the thing that we get, that we see clients like the most about a model, is that it shows them the impact of their sort of top of the funnel media, so TV, out of home, and so on their bottom of the funnel. So the impact of their TV campaign on their search campaigns and so on. And then they really start to lean into that. So it means that they can start to coordinate their offline media with their online media and different strategies and so on.
I think a really common question that I think clients have as well is, when should I flight my media to sort of promote my big event or my app launch or whatever? And that's something that comes out of media mix modeling. So we have ad stocks or retention rates that come out of media, and how long before an event, what's the tail of that media campaign. I think the beauty of it is that with attribution, there's a lot of debate over what's the attribution window. Should I be looking at views? Should I be looking at clicks? Should I be looking at last click, first touch, or something in between that? You don't have that debate with media mix model. The data sort of does the talking, which is a really nice part, and you get out of it. One of my favorite pieces is diminishing returns curves. Media, unfortunately, doesn't have a linear response to, as you put more media in, you start to get less and less back. That's just a law. I wish it was the other way, or an exponential curve. But you get these curves out, and those curves become your planning engine. And I think that's the beauty. Media mix modeling is one point on your measurement journey, but then it's feeding that into an optimizer or a scenario tool, which I think you guys have in your solution. Yep. But that's where it's sort of the rubber hits the road. It's using it and planning your media against it. That's, I think, the secret sauce in media mix modeling.
I suppose to answer the question at a very high level, what are the benefits that you get out of it is typically what we see is if a client is transitioning from, or not transitioning, if they're supporting their touch attribution models with media mix modeling, typically the benefit that you get out of it is more sales for the same amount of spend. So what a model is going to show you is how much more efficiency you can get out of the market. So that's the very highest level, better performance, basically.
So this isn't a new concept, I guess. You can say MMM has been around for a really long time. Why do you think this is a topic that we're talking about more and more now? And why is it important that we're having this conversation right now? What's happening in the industry to drive this?
The biggest thing and the most obvious thing is obviously privacy policy changes now. So with iOS 14.5 a few years ago, and now with Google Sandbox upon us at some point, probably about this time next year. The privacy policies are always changing. They're restricting the feedback that marketers and the brands get from their marketing investment. And MMM is privacy first data, so it doesn't require any user level data. So essentially it's future proof as well. So it's future proof against any further privacy policy changes, which there will be. GDPR will evolve, iOS or Apple will change something and so on. It's completely bulletproof against all of that. So the focus has turned to MMM now because, let's face it, we built a platform, so we're shouting about it. So everyone's sort of, and also there's lots of other competitors now in the market as well because of the privacy policy changes. I like to think that actually the privacy policy changes have done marketers a favor. So it's actually going to mean that you're forced to use a more advanced system, which gives you better results anyway. It's hard to understand, it's data science, but if you pick a good system, then all of the hard work's done for you, all of the heavy lifting is done for you. And the result of that is going to be better results. And as marketeers, our number one objective is to improve business outcomes. That's it. It doesn't matter if you're a brand marketeer or a performance marketeer. Your objective, your role is there to increase sales for that company. And MMM is going to give you a new way to do that.
Privacy, everyone's first answer.
Yes,
to that.
exactly.
Yeah, I think just to sort of double down on that, I think that the why now, I think we're in a really, really unique position that we actually have deterministic attribution alongside media mix modeling. If everyone continues to work in the digital media industry for the next 10, 20 years, you're not going to have this again. There's never going to be this side by side where you can actually see what media mix modeling is telling you and compare that to what attribution has told you. Now, they're two different worlds. Just because the media mix modeling tells you that your incremental ROI is 5 and attribution is telling you your attributed ROI is 10, one is sort of measuring speed, the other is measuring weight. They're two different units of measurement. It's unfortunate that both have a dollar sign or a pound sign in front of them, but they're two very, very different things. So I think why now? It's use the opportunity. Privacy changes are coming. They're not going to stop. I think India are the latest ones to have a new Privacy Act come out. Obviously, I think if you're US-based and EU-based, you're more acutely aware of the privacy changes because of Apple. I think when ATT came out first, it was like 50% of the US mobile market went dark from a trackable perspective. I think also the other side is this week we had WWDC 24 and we had app ad attribution kit, I think, from Apple, another very catchy name, triple AK or ad kit, whatever you want to call it. I think all that does for us as an industry is it goes, oh, another change. We have Google who said they're postponing the cookie until next year, 2025. Let's see, by the end of 25, they might. I think Google Ad ID is probably going to be another 3 years after that, so it could be the end of the decade before we see that go. So these conversations are going to drag on for the next while. The lucky thing about sort of AdKit, I think is going to be the name it's going to be called, is that it's backward compatible with Scan. Any work that brands have done on Scan is not going to be in vain. It introduces re-engagement, but still outside of that, that's still just a within-channel attribution solution. It's not an incrementality solution. So optimizing against Apple is still needed for within channel, but you need that sort of foundational aspect, and that's where MMM comes in. And that's why now you can build it out alongside it, and it's your ROI, that's what you'll report on to your senior leadership. And that's what will get you your media budget.
I really like that sense of urgency that you've created, and you've got the side-by-side data view. When do you think it really becomes urgent, when that window of time starts to close out, and we're going to lose that opportunity to see that data comparison? How long do people have?
Well, we're in it now, aren't we? So, because you don't want to get to the situation where Google Sandbox comes out and, as Dane said, your signals go even darker than they currently are, and you have to do MMM. You're already behind the curve at that point. So you may as well start building models now, start testing it in an environment where it's not 100% critical for you. But because MMM isn't something you can decide on today and start seeing the results tomorrow. It's an iterative process. So you build a model, you keep on adding to it, you take things out, you add things in, and so on. And you start to interpret the data in a different way to what you would do normally through touch attribution. And there's a learning curve, and it can be uncomfortable because it's very technical, but it's super interesting. It's leagues above where touch attribution is in terms of how advanced it is, the insights that you get. The tool, the levers that it allows you to pull and push, basically. So to answer the question, you should be doing it now.
Absolutely.
Rather than this time next year.
Yeah, like I think the house is on fire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so your house is on fire. Things are burning. It's just not burned down yet. And I think that to your point around MMM and the solutions, I think that everyone in digital marketing, up until I'd say about 6-9 months ago, when they thought Privacy Sandbox was going to come out, 1% went in January. We thought it was going to be sort of, I think, 50% by now, towards the end of this year. we saw a huge uptick in interest in MMM. People really take their head out of their sands, like, okay, we need to do something right now. Obviously, Google's change has sort of dampened that a little bit, but I think it's still because people are trying to find a cookie-shaped solution for a cookie-shaped hole that doesn't exist. Like if you're trying to replace the cookie with another deterministic identifier, you're going down a dead end. As I said, IP address will go. Any fingerprinting you shouldn't be doing. So anything that's depending on that sort of user level ID it's a fool's errand. And you're hearing a lot of providers come out who will say, oh, we can still do that. And it's, people who are doing MMM like us, we're like, you don't need to.
No.
And I think to your point, it's an opportunity. I think this is a great opportunity for our industry. We're not going to, I think we can still prove ROI and prove ROAS. I think that's the common question is, how am I going to prove this out? And you can, and I think harder, you're right, it takes longer to implement MMM than it does a typical attribution model. But actually, it is highly understandable and highly interpretable when you actually get it up and running. You can lift the hood on it. You can show the stats for people who are technically minded. Most people don't need to be or care. And you shouldn't need to. All you need to care about is, what is the incremental benefit of media? Can I use for media planning? Is it accurate? And that gets proved out in the modeling. Is it accurate? Well, make the change based on MMM. We'll see what happens in the model. Is it accurate? The proof's in the pudding. Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that's where it goes. So it's not something you just do and hope that it works. It's like you prove it out again and again and again, week by week, month on month. And especially with your guys' platform, you can do that at speed and at scale.
So you've created the sense of urgency. The house is on fire. You've mentioned that you were trying to fill a hole with the same thing. So actually, what pain points can be addressed through MMM? Can you give a bit more detail? Dave, do you want to go first?
Well, I think the biggest one, and I think the one that attribution never has really solved, is how much should I invest in media? That is the biggest pain point. What should my budget be? And then what should my budget be by channel? And then you can go down into what region should I invest in to get the most effective budget. And then it moves into flighting. When should I flight that media budget throughout time? I think at a very, very top line level, they're the key pain points that media mix modeling solves. Because really, we talk about incrementality. If we all just switch into a world of incrementality, we're no longer really talking about it. We're just talking about measurement. It just becomes the ROI because we don't focus on attribution anymore. So I think at a top line level, that's how I would go about it. As Gary said, optimizing your media. And budget setting.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100% agreement in terms of it's about understanding your point of diminishing returns, which touch attribution can't do. Another pain point is going to be the offline media as well. So most brands do use some form of offline media. Most people jump to the sort of doing, we don't do TV adverts or whatever it may be, but they maybe sponsor events or do CRM email mail outs and so on and so forth. MMM can measure all of that and the impact of it. Whether it's only like 0.5% or 5 or 6% on your sales, is going to give you that read. So a much more holistic review, sort of view of your marketing mix, and it means that brand teams and marketing teams can start to collaborate to get a much better result for the business overall.
Understand. If you were a skeptic of MMM, if let's say you were someone that didn't necessarily have had the experience with it, is it not just going to tell me that I need to spend more money, or that my offline channels are going to do better? Is it not going to just predict what my assumptions that I guess the industry already has? How does MMM support that?
So I think there's a number of things coming out of it. Obviously, when you get a model, I don't know whether you agree, it shouldn't be telling you the world is, red when you thought it was white. Like, there should be a certain amount that comes out of the model. You're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That fits with my worldview. But the really, really interesting conversations happen when there's something that doesn't necessarily fit with your worldview. It doesn't necessarily say invest more. It can say invest less, but more often than not, it's more in a certain channel and less in another channel. I think where that tends to come from, though, is, I guess, the skepticism is around sort of search channels. And sometimes, for some brands, they're not as incremental as we think they are. However, that doesn't mean we just stop investing in search. And I think you made the point earlier about sort of that network of effects. And what we see a huge amount, especially with offline channels, is that you invest in a big TV campaign, a big out-of-home campaign, and then it's all captured by search. And something you can prove through media mix modeling is that sort of that network effect. And actually, I should upweight my branded search or my search activity when I'm doing a big TV campaign or a big out-of-home campaign to capture the latent demand that's been generated. So search isn't going to suffer. I think it helps you set budgets. Like, that is the key part. I think if you're really skeptical, do a geo test and do an incrementality test. That's the sort of gateway drug into incrementality measurement, and that sort of will prove it out.
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously, it's ad tech. There's lots of skepticism, no matter what you do, DSPs, MMM, whatever it is. But it's one of the challenges that we face is clients want to see similar results to what they're used to seeing. So they're saying, well, how come the model is telling me that we got 10 sales from Google, but my touch attributions to them we got 50. And it's kind of bridging that gap of knowledge in terms of really understanding what MMM does and what touch attribution does. As I said before, one's measuring correlation between an incremental correlation, and the other one's measuring the last touch point. And the other thing that you can do with it, and we found this is quite useful as well, is you can actually use the touch attribution signal as a starting point for the model, and that makes people a bit more comfortable, let's say, with it. So they start to see data that feels familiar, looks familiar to them. Quite often when we go to a client who's interested in building a model, they may have done something a year or two before, and that model that they built told them something that they didn't like to see, and therefore they've taken a step back from MMM for the last year or so. So by using the touch attribution data as a prior almost, it can, with an optimization engine on there as well, it will start from that position and keep on optimizing you towards where the MMM model feels it should be. And that can be a good way to sort of transition into MMM.
But I think you make a really important point. I think it's around if you had, a lot of people have had bad experiences with MMM. And that tends to stem from trying to do it in-house or working with maybe a provider that didn't understand maybe the mobile ecosystem, didn't understand digital. And I think that's why, if I was recommending people when they're starting MMM, it is to work with a provider, again, like yourselves or with your media agency, because it's a massive cultural change. Like, we can talk about putting priors in, and again, that is a fairly technical concept into a model and how that works. But it is a massive cultural change in how media is being optimized and what you're doing with it. And I think that typically works better if you're using a third party, if you're using someone who's outside of your business, because culture takes a huge amount of time to change internally. And a lot of the time these are expensive programs, and they do them internally. You're hiring a highly skilled data scientist, that's not cheap, or team of data scientists. And if you're not going to see a return on that program for 12 to 18 months, then it's like, well, it could just completely fail. I guess it's wiped out, or the result, as you say, is something that's maybe a little bit challenging. Whereas if you come in and you can build a model up in 8 to 10 weeks and challenge a little bit in a soft way, but it's a little bit easier because you can go, I have a group of clients and I'm seeing the same pattern across. And it's not that benchmarking. So I think that's why having a third party in the conversation enables change at a faster rate.
I mean, Dave makes a really good point. It's the biggest challenge with any new technology is old mindset. So people trying to use a new methodology with their old mindset. It's a bit like when the TV was invented in the USA, however many years ago it was now. The first 2 years, the broadcast was a TV camera pointing at a radio, and they were transmitting a radio, basically playing the show on the radio. And that sort of is a sort of, people not understanding how to use the new technology. And that's kind of this is the period that we sort of find ourselves in. I'm hoping that, we sit here in 3-4 years' time, and it's almost like an industry standard. So and the room's full of people that have got great stories and whatever else.
Absolutely. It kind of brings me on to my next question of where you think MMM actually fits into the measurement framework. Obviously, some people have various measurement tools, some people just rely on one. What are your, where does MMM fit in for both of you guys? I don't know if you want to go first.
The great thing about MMM is that it can run in parallel with whatever you're doing, and it's completely non-disruptive as well. So there's no technical integration that's required, so an SDK, for example. So it's not like you're switching from one MMP provider to another. There's no heavy lift really on the client side. You don't have to stop any campaigns to run an MMM project. So the good thing is you should see it as something that enriches what you already do, not something that's going to replace it. So, yeah, it runs in parallel, very little disruption to if any at all, to your sort of marketing workflow as it is. I suppose where it fits in terms of that sort of operational workflow is looking at it from a sort of strategical point of view, I suppose, in terms of so MMM or a good MMM system is going to understand your seasonality, your investment sort of cost curves and everything else on there. But more importantly, it's going to hopefully going to give you a forecast, an accurate forecast on what's going to happen. And because it knows what's going to happen if Taylor Swift is in town, or if you invest X amount of money in Google and so on, it's going to give you a much more strategical tool to forecast over the next month, the next quarter or so on.
Well, if Taylor Swift's in town, we know where everyone is, so everyone's at the concert, obviously. I think that the key thing is that it's not a panacea. It doesn't solve every media problem. It still works in conjunction with attribution. Attribution is still there, as you say. Whatever way it's being incorporated in, your provider should incorporate it in the correct way. And there are sort of right and wrong ways to incorporate attribution. Our approach is very much the sort of measurement trifecta. So it's media mix modeling as a baseline core. And as I said earlier, it's your sort of golden thread throughout time. It's not going to change. It's there. Attribution still for within channel tactics or feeding it into the ecosystem, whatever way you're modeling into that one modeling ecosystem. But then I think that you still meet a lot of skepticism. You still meet a lot of people going, I don't know if that really is my ROI. I don't know if that is my CPA or the incremental impact. And that's where you have testing come in. And I think the key thing to remember is that geo-testing is the gold standard in incrementality measurement for the privacy-first world. Obviously, on-platform lift tests were the gold standard. They're done at a user level. We don't dispute that. They were the gold standard. But as we lose that, we do need geo-testing as well. And I think just one sort of call-out is that A/B testing isn't incrementality testing. I know there's a common misconception around this, but we have the European Championships on now at the moment. Ireland have done really well so far, some good medals, gold medals. But if you think of a race, a 100-meter race, an A/B test is like looking at first and second place and looking at the incremental difference between first and second. So you'll know that first beat second by a second or a second and a half. Incrementality testing or geolift testing is about how long did it take first place to run from the start to the finish line? How long did it take the second place to run from the start to the finish line? You need a ground truth. You need something off. And I think media mix modeling obviously measures that. Geolift testing proves it beyond doubt, black and white proving it. And the only thing that you need in media mix modeling isn't going dark, which is great. You don't turn off media, so you don't have an opportunity cost of your media to measure. But you do need variation. So if you are just doing the same thing over time, week on week, day by day, there's not really much that media mix modeling can unpick. So there has to be some variation. Luckily on the digital side, there's a lot of variation in terms of impressions and clicks, and depending on what we decide to measure, it can be a challenge if you're doing offline media, and digital out of home or out of home activity in general can sometimes be a little bit flatter and hard to pick up. So there's certain measurements or certain channels that I think that media mix modeling can struggle with sometimes, but you can prove them out further through geolift testing, and that gets fed into your modeling ecosystem.
Yeah, it helps recalibrate
the
model as well.
So you've explained why it's so important. We know that the privacy elements are why we need to do this. We know it's a robust method. It does sound to some quite complicated in terms of how do I get to the point where I can actually do this? What inputs are needed? What do brands need to start considering now to get this going so that they're ready? when it's going to be what's needed.
Yeah, I mean, the methodology is complex. I'm not a data scientist, my team are data scientists. And when they talk to me about how things work, I'm kind of like, what are you talking about? So, but the inputs that you need are actually beautifully simple. So they're just I was going to say at a high level, but this is pretty much all that's needed. So if we're talking about an app client, for example, we would model the conversion funnel. So the conversion funnel would be the install, a registration event, a revenue event, and maybe something else like a 7-day trial or something like that. So we would model each one of those, and that data should be readily available to you from your MMP or from your web analytics partner. And then the second element is media costs. And it's all done on a daily aggregated level as well. So we require your media costs for Google, for Facebook, for Apple, daily aggregated media costs, and the same with your events as well. And then, I can't speak for everyone, but we then inject some external signals into that model as well. So we work with the client to understand what they feel affects them. Most businesses are affected by national holidays. Most businesses are affected by big sporting events and so on and so forth. So we would just input those signals into the model as well. And you just need about 2 to 3 years worth of data. I mean, minimum is like 1 year's worth of data, but ideally you want 2 to 3 years worth of data.
There'll be some clients thinking, I don't have 3 years worth of data. I don't have 1 year's worth of data.
I think it's with any sort of measurement initiative or anything to do with media, it's not an all or nothing. There is always something you can do. And I think that if there's anybody sort of thinking, going, oh God, I can't start that, I don't have 2 years, I don't even have a year of data.
Yeah.
There's no time at the present to start. So you can still start collecting your data and building it out for a media mix model now. So you can speak with people like us and we'll say, okay, this is what you collect, this we have to do, we'll set up the piping and all that. But typically people have a lot more data than they actually realize. And I'll be honest, I've rarely found that people can't do an MMM, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, as Gary mentioned, like obviously you guys model the whole funnel, but possibly you don't have all those touch points across the whole funnel. So maybe you start at one point in that funnel, build that model out, prove out the effectiveness on that, and then evolve it over time. And that can be of adding other KPIs in, can be adding other regions in, other products. It can get really, really big. And you know, the best clients that I've worked with, I think I said at the start, they've used media mix modeling as the center of their forecasting for their business. So when they go out to the city, they are forecasting their returns from a media mix model. There is no difference from a media mix model and what actuaries do. It's the same modeling approach. We just do it for media, they do it for insurance, but it's the same approach. And yes, it is complex, but you know, really for the users of it, that's why you hire other people in. You guys don't need to worry about complexity. Like, being honest, it's not that complex to the people who work in it. They do it all the time. But the output shouldn't be complex. Using a media mix model shouldn't be complex. And to be really honest, it's not. It's just as easy to action as attribution. There really shouldn't be any fear on it. And as I said, you can start small and then expand.
Great. So what are the 5 steps to success? Like, what's the advice that we can give people to get them started?
5. Okay, let's start. I suppose
you can do 2.5. 2.5.
So as Dane said, so really the inputs aren't that complicated. Everyone should have the inputs that are needed to build a model. Exactly what Dane just said. We very rarely ever come across a client that doesn't have the right amount of data. Where we do sometimes get challenged is, certainly in the app marketing space, is if a client is only using ASA, for example, for iOS, and they're only using Google UAC on Android, because the media diversity isn't correct. We still can build a model, it's just not going to, it's not going to be able to tell you too much because it doesn't have many optimization options there. So the first thing is, get your data together, and that should be a pretty simple process. And then, again, going back to something that Dane said earlier on, is there's no time like the present. So even if you don't have 12, 24, 36 months worth of data, maybe you only have 6 or 9 months worth of data. Just start getting the data and also start working with an MMM service provider that can start training your model, because they will let you know when the model is ready to start being used. There's my 2.
Yeah, I think it's having conversations with your senior leaders. I think that this media mix modeling isn't something that a performance manager alone will own. It's something that the whole organization has to sort of get involved in. It does drive a lot of conversation. It can challenge assumptions in a good way. But I think that if it does challenge an assumption, the onus is on the company who are doing the modeling to come back and justify that really sort of clearly as to why. So media mix modeling will tell you the what. Still getting the why out of your media mix model can be difficult, and that's why, again, you work with a third party, because they understand what's coming out of the model, they understand how to interpret that model and how to action and feedback. So I think it's, as Gary said, I think it's data, getting your data right. I think that there's a common misconception because you have a lot of data, you have a lot of answers. Unless you're collecting your data conscientiously with questions in mind or asking the questions of the data, you probably don't have as much data as you think. And again, we come in, that's what slows things down, I think, a lot of the times, is finding the data. As we said, there's very rarely an opportunity where we can't do a media mix model, but it does mean if you haven't got the data ready, it can take longer. So data, I think variation in media channels, I think is a good point. Budget level isn't always a problem. I think it can work across a broad range of budget levels, but I think back to your point, Gary, I think it's like if you're only in one channel or 2 channels, is there a need for a media mix model? That's questionable. You talk to providers. It mightn't be a need for it just yet. You might actually be okay using attribution to solve your problems with a bit of testing to get those diminishing returns curves. But if you are a true omni-channel investor, you need a media mix model. And then I think 3, 4 channels, you definitely go into it. And I think there's different, depending on your brand size, there's different approaches for that. So yeah, data, stakeholder engagements, getting them involved, planning variations in your media plans. Yeah, they're sort of key. Numbers 5.
Absolutely. I think if people are even thinking about and having this conversation, they're already halfway there to get going. It's taken us a long time to get to this point where so many people are engaged with it. We're coming to the end of our time. Is there anything that you would really love the audience? I know we've got a lot of people listening and watching that you want them to take away when they think about MMM and the myths and everything.
I'd say, but probably the biggest myth that we come up against is that it's hard to build a model. And if you're not a data scientist and you're going to start doing it, yeah, it's going to be really hard, but you don't have to do it. And what they mean by hard is that it's technical and there's loads of data involved and so on. And as we've just explained, it isn't really. I mean, we can get clients up and running anything from sort of 2 weeks to about 8 weeks. 8 weeks it all depends on data readiness and how high quality the data is. But we've had models built in about 2 weeks. So it isn't as difficult to build a model as the market perceives it to be, especially if you sort of pick the right partner to go with as well. And then I suppose, secondly, media mix modeling has been around for decades, but it's predominantly been used by brand marketing teams. Now, with all of the sort of technological advances that we've made in recent years, it's now able to give you feedback in a performance marketing domain as well. So it can be used very successfully by performance marketing teams as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's common misconception is it's slow. It's not. And while, there's that upfront effort, be it 8 weeks if you're a complex brand, and typically if you have offline channels as well as online channels, online sales channels, not the media side. But it's fast. I think you can get insights, you said, at possibly a weekly level, maybe even daily, depending on your data. It can be highly granular. The granularity is a typical complaint you get at media mix modeling, that it doesn't necessarily give you the granularity you need. I think you said it can go really, really granular, or can be supplemented with other measurement approaches to give you granularity that it lacks. So it's not a problem for performance marketers, and it's not as complex to understand, I think, as people think it is. It's definitely complex to do, and I think a common misconception or myth is that all the tools coming out from Google and Facebook and all these self-serve tools, they're great. Don't get me wrong, I think they're great, and I think that if you have a data science team, you can build them out brilliantly. But as we come back to that point at the start, I've seen so many failures building it out internally. It does require a skill set. It does require a team to do it who have done it before, have experience across brands. So doing it yourself isn't the right way to do it. Going with a partner is the correct way.
Awesome. Thank you. I don't think you'll meet two people that love talking about MMM as much as these guys. We probably could have gone on and on, but thank you so much. I know that I've learned something from this. And yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah.